guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today's video is featuring some products from Colorado Craft Company. This is the Smell the Roses, Stamps and Dies, and then the rose background. We're going to be doing an oldie but a goodie technique. We're just going to be doing it a little bit differently. So we're going to do a trapped emboss resist. And the reason that I decided that I was going to do this is, first of all, it is an oldie but a goodie for a reason. But also, I've noticed through the comments that there are some more new card makers that have been like popping up on the channel, which I love. And thank you guys so much for subscribing and sticking around. But this is just kind of a really fun, kind of dramatic one that you can do. I'm going to do mine a little bit differently. So I'm inking this up with Gina K Whisper ink. And the reason that I'm doing that is so that I can see the pattern, but it's not going to interfere with the actual technique. So I think this background is beautiful, and there were some other people who I've seen use it who've like painted it or colored the whole thing, and I think that that's awesome. But I love the Big and Bold series, and I really wanted to color that big rose just because roses are classic. You can use them for just an absolute myriad of things. And so, but this way, it will allow us to kind of customize where our coloring is. Normally, when you do the technique that we're going to do, which I've heard people refer to it as like the Joseph's coat technique, and I'm not sure if if you only use black or if you use a rainbow of colors. I'm not really sure. I'm only using 3 colors today because I am kind of spot coloring my background. So here, if you're having trouble seeing it, you can always use your, acetate overlay that comes with your stamp set. And I'm going in with my blending buddies, and basically I'm going to put pink where the roses are and green where the leaves are. The yellow is my buffer color between the two because pink and green are complementary colors, and if we mix them together we're going to get a muddy brown. So the yellow is like my buffer color, but also then gives me the opportunity to color a 2-tone rose so that everything is matchy-matchy, because you guys know how I roll with that. And you can see as we're adding the ink to it where that Whisper ink is, you can see it. But no fear, you're not going to be able to see that in the final design. So I'm putting the picked raspberry down. Then I'm going to go in with this mustard seed kind of all around the pink. And then wherever the leaves are, I'm going to go in with that mowed lawn. I have done this in the past, and I have other videos on it where I've just done kind of like a rainbow of colors with no rhyme or reason, just a random rainbow pattern. And that's also beautiful too. So you can use this kind of however is going to work best for your project. I think having it custom colored for the flowers is kind of fun, and it's just a way to kind of stretch this technique a little bit further. So that's why I chose to do it this way. Some things to note when doing this. I'm obviously using Distress inks. Distress inks are made to stay wet longer so that you can emboss with them. It's also what helps them blend. They stay like a little bit damp on the surface, and when you're blending the colors, then they work a lot nicer together that way. But because we're going to heat emboss over top of this, you must make sure that your background is completely dry. And I tell you this as a person who has learned the hard way, not once or twice, but multiple times. You would think that I would learn, but sometimes I just get so into it, I forget that there's a drying step in between. So I am going to go in with my heat tool and dry this just the way it is. I understand the way that it looks right now is not that pretty, and that's okay. It's going to be pretty in the end. Just trust the process. So once I heat set it, I'm going to go ahead and test it right here with just some clear embossing powder, and I can see that it's still sticking. So I'm going to wipe off all of that clear embossing powder, make sure that the piece is clean of any embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat it again, and then I'm going to test it again. So now this time you can see when I test it, there's no embossing powder sticking to it, and I know I can safely move on to the next step. So the next step is the heat embossing. I'm going to treat with my anti-static tool, and this time I am inking it up with Versamark, which is a clear sticky embossing ink. If you wanted not to do if you wanted just the outline, you could maybe stamp them in like oxides and clear heat emboss over them. This just seemed like an easier way to get the look that I was going for rather than having to kind of like mask them off. I did leave my stamp in my MISTI and I put my paper back in the same spot. But ultimately we're going to be going over this with some darker ink. So if you didn't do that, don't fear, you can still do the technique. So I inked it up. You can see that sticky ink sitting on top. With any heat embossing, if I have the opportunity to stamp it twice, I'm going to take it just so that I make sure I have good coverage, especially with these really large background stamps. It's easy to kind of miss a spot, think that you got it really well, and then you go to heat emboss it and it's not sticking right. So I stamp mine twice. I use a little bit of that I call it the Sherry Carroll CPR method. If you don't know who Sherry Carroll is, she's been in the industry super long time, super talented, and she still makes videos for Simon Says Stamp. If you've never heard of her, go check her out. She's fantastic. She's my spirit animal. But anyway, so now I'm going to put my clear embossing powder on, and you'll see that it's just going to stick to the areas that we have stamped. When you're talking about the clear embossing, look at, I dropped it. That was almost a disaster, but it's all right. We're just going to sprinkle the areas that fell off back on. We're allowed to make like happy accidents in crafting. It's going to be okay. But, you want to pick a clear embossing powder that is more of like a fine or a detail. So especially for an image like this, where we just want those like fine lines of the image to show. You don't want something like a UT, like an ultra thick embossing enamel, because it's going to make your image really chunky and not detailed. So just try to pay attention to what kind of embossing powder that you are using. So here, now that everything is heat set and is nice and shiny, now we're going to move on to like the wow part of the technique, which is my favorite part because when it comes to cards, I love the drama. So I am going to use black soot distress ink. You can do this one of two ways. You can apply it with a blending buddy like you see me doing here. This can be a little bit time consuming to build up the opacity to completely cover the background. Instead, what I like to do is take my ink pad direct to paper. And I'm just going to use a little piece of tape just to protect my fingers from all the black ink that I'm putting down. But you'll notice when I'm rubbing this on, it is giving very dark results, but it's not getting in all those crevices. So once I go direct to paper with my ink pad, I then go back in with my blending buddy to really work it into those crevices. Don't worry, we're not going to leave it like this. It does get prettier as we go. But you do want to make sure that you are going to be using an ink, like in this case, I'm using distress inks with water. You don't want to use a, what do they call them? Hold on. I can see it in my head. I totally can. What is it? Archival. You don't want to use one of those types of inks that you have to clean with a stamp cleaner because it won't buff off your embossing. It will stick to it. So you do really want to make sure you're working with an ink that is going to wipe off with just water. You can also do this with an oxide, but just understand with an oxide, it's not the difference won't be as bold. It will dry back chalkier and be softer. So here I'm going in, this is just with a dry paper towel, wiping off what I can. And then I'm going to set this aside to dry. I will come back in later with a slightly damp cloth and finish wiping off the rest of it. In the meantime, let's move on to the stamping and coloring of this big, beautiful rose. I am stamping this in Hero Arts Intense Black ink. This is one of my favorite ones to use with alcohol markers. And today I'm going to be coloring with my Copics. If you watch my channel, you guys know that I really love a lot of variety in my color. And so today we are going to be concentrating on blending color families in one image. and some tricks that you can use. I also left in my mistakes, which I prefer to do so that you guys don't think everybody is perfect, because we are not. We are all just people out here making art, all on different kind of journeys and at different kind of skill levels, but that everybody, makes mistakes and we can all learn from things. So for the leaves, rose leaves grow kind of serrated. Like that's how, like they're a little jagged. And so in order to enhance that and give the leaves a little bit more dimension, you don't have to match it up exactly. This is not about perfectionism. Art is never about that. Please don't ever think that it is. What I am doing is from the edge, I am bringing in little flicks of my darker color, and I am also making it a little darker on the inside so that it looks like the leaf is a little cupped. But by doing these little triangles of color on the outside in, it's going to create almost like little stripes in the leaf. And so once I do my darkest color, then I'm going to go in with my next darkest midtone, and I'm going to go over what I've just put down, and then I'm just going to slightly extend it. So you'll start to see those stripes really come together. And this particular technique kind of looks like a hot mess until you get to the lightest color. And then when you get to the lightest color, it all comes together. You could do this with 3 colors. I typically work with a 4-color blend, but 3 colors would probably be perfectly fine. So you can see each time we're going over it and we're extending it out just a little bit. And then with the lightest color, we're doing the same thing, flicking in from the outside edges. And it creates just a ton of dimension and a ton of texture in the leaves that helps them to look like they are more jagged than a smooth leaf, like a eucalyptus would grow. So we're just going to do a couple of leaves here so that you can see the process a few times. Since I color so many florals, guys, like so many, you have probably seen this technique before. And honestly, you're probably going to see it again. But I like the yellow greens. I did try to match my green to that mowed lawn in the background, but I am not a gardener. I do think that rose leaves do tend to be a bit more true green than what I've chose here. But because I have that black background, I really wanted bright colors, so they look almost like neon. So there's this huge contrast that creates lots of interest. So here I've picked out my colors for my rose, and I want it to be a rose that goes from pink to yellow tips. And so normally when we're putting down our shading, our darkest color, I would tell you to follow the lines that the illustrator has given you to put down your darkest color. It's a little bit different when you're coloring a 2-color family blend, because the outside edges are going to be yellow. So I'm not going to use my darkest pink to put down the shadows there. And you will see that out of habit, I do end up doing that, and then I will show you how I go over that so that I can kind of fix my boo-boo. But the same rules still apply. Any point where 2 things meet, you'll have shading, and any point where one object lays on top of the other, you will have shading. So for the pink, because it's in the center, like where it's growing from the bud, what do they call that when I should know that, where it meets. I used to know the word and now I don't. But anyway, from the center, like where the stamen is from the flower, all of those areas are going to be much more pink. Whereas as our flower is blooming and those petals are getting larger, you will see more yellow in those petals. So it'll be more pink in the center and then more yellow on its edges. So once I have my darkest color in, then same thing, I'm going to go in with my next darkest midtone. I am going to go over what I've already colored and kind of extend out those lines. if you guys are longtime watchers, you know that you can also start with your lightest color and go from your lightest color to your darkest and darkest back into your lightest. I colored like that for years and years. Here's where, do you see, there's the first one that I did it, where I added the shading to the outside edge of the petal, and it should not have been pink. It should have been yellow. But I've done it now. It's, you know what I'm saying? I've done it now. It is what it is. I did have to pause to refill my marker. But now I'm just committed to it. Okay. So sometimes when we have an accident, we need to embrace it and make it look like it was on purpose. So I'm just going to go ahead and commit to the fact that I'm going to have to add a little bit of pink shading to the edges of my petals and blend that into the colors. So here, this is the RV06. This is my next darkest midtone. It's the lighter midtone. And you can see, even though I'm extending it out, I'm still leaving white edges around the petals. And once again, there's going to be a lot more white left on the outside petals than there are on the inside, where it's really tightly packed in there with petals. That's definitely going to be more pink. But as we bloom out, we'll see more of that yellow, just kind of like extending those colors out and committing to that boo-boo that I made to make sure that everything looks the same and as if it was intentional. Now, if somebody who never watched this video and they're just the recipient of this card, they're not going to know that it wasn't intentional, right? Or they're not going to know that we didn't mean to put the pink at the top. And at this point, I could have completely disregarded the yellow and just had a pink rose, and it would have been fine. But I was like, I'm committed to this. I'm going to make it work. So now I'm out to the RV04. This is another mistake on my part. So the yellows that I chose are a Y02 and a Y08, but my lightest pink is an RV04. The 4 is too far away from the 2 for them to blend well. And I should have known better. When you're with Copic markers, I can only speak on Copic markers for this. You're looking at that last number. So if you have a Y02, you want to blend it into an RV02 or a YR02. Those are going to blend better. You're looking at that last number. So a RV04 would blend into a V04, a B04, and you're going to see here. Now I'm going in with the Y02, and I'm having a lot of trouble getting it to blend. Instead of getting out the RV02, which is what I should have done. Okay, do as I say, not as I do. That old adage. I'm trying to make it blend. I'm trying to make it work with the colors that I have already picked. And it's not working. They're too far away. And so sometimes we need that buffer color, that RV02 is what I'm going to bring in here in a second. I keep trying to make it work with these two yellows, right? And it's just not happening. They are still very much separated from each other. There's no soft blend. And I'm continually going back and forth with these two colors. I'm risking the ink bleeding out into the rest of the image because I'm packing in so much ink. And what I really needed to do was just find that middle color. And here it is. Finally, I'm like, okay, this is what I need to be doing. And you'll see once I add the RV02, I don't have that hard line of delineation anymore. I have a much softer blend. Do I still have to work with it? Yes, because I'm blending a yellow into a pink. So I do still need to do a layer or two of color to make them make friends, but I certainly don't have to work as hard as I did on those other two petals where I was trying to force it. So make sure you're looking at that last number and that they're close enough. Like you could blend a 4 into a 5 or a 4 into a 3. You could blend a 2 into a 1, sometimes maybe even a 0 or a 3. The 4 in this particular color family is just too far away. So you can see me going back in with that RVO2. And like before I said in my ink blending, my yellow was my buffer color. That RVO2 right now is acting as my buffer color because alcohol markers are transparent. And so when you put a lighter color over a darker color, it does remove a little bit of that color. And that is what I need the RVO2 to do. I need it to knock back that 04 so that everything can blend with that yellow. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I am very happy with how the flower came out. I think it's very pretty, but I left those portions in so that you could see that nobody is perfect. And you can still have a pretty card even if you started with something that you didn't love. Here, what I'm doing is I'm going in with that 0 marker to see if I can lighten up those 2 petals that I just kept packing that Y08 into. Just to see if I can lift up that color a little bit. And then once it's dry, I am going to go back in once I realize I'm really not going to be able to lift it as much as I thought that I could. I'm going to go back in with those pinks and just kind of deepen that up so that it, again, looks intentional. Even though it was a mistake on my part, we can make it look purposeful. So blending those out and adding just a little bit more darkness helps them to look like they're more like underneath and kind of rolling back on themselves. And then I will use that, again, that RVO2 to blend them out. I hope that that is making sense. I just think it's important to be super transparent when doing these things because a lot of things, well, most things, quite honestly, on social media are not real. And I am a real person who puts my pants on just like you do in the morning. And I want, as an artist, for you guys to also see that real artists, even when this is your full-time job, still make mistakes. And it's not just you, and it's not perfect every time. It's actually never perfect anytime for me anyway. So because I have that black background, I don't want this bright white edge on my die cut. So I do go in with my black marker and just kind of outline my image before I die cut it. So that way it has a nice black edge and it will blend in with the background that we've created. For the sentiment, I went with just a really simple "Hello, beautiful." And I decided to do this in white on black, but there's no other white in my card. And I will show you how I kind of tie those two together. So I treated it with my anti-static tool. I inked it up with my white pigment ink, stamped it twice, just like I told you guys before. And then I used a white detail embossing powder, went ahead and heat set that. I do have my heat gun heating up while I'm doing all of my stamping and things, just to limit the warping of the paper. And then I'm going to use each of their coordinating dies to go ahead and cut them out. And you can see just how little of that black I had to do. Really, I just needed to outline it. You don't have to color in the whole paper. Now that these are run through the die cutting machine, I'm going to start building my card. So I chose to put my background down flat, just glue it directly down. I did trim it just a little bit so that it is matted on my black card base. And then I will put that down. And I should have wiped it beforehand, to be quite honest. But I didn't. I waited until it was glued down. But then I will go in. You do not want a sopping wet rag or a sopping wet baby wipe. You just want it to be slightly damp so that you can go over top of it. And then you can see how much more of that color comes through that trapped embossed resist, which this background doesn't even need this focal point. Like, you could just put a large sentiment on it and it would be very pretty. But I like this rose, so I'm putting it on there. I did pop it up. It kind of overhangs just a little bit. So there's a couple of the little leaves that I'm going to end up just trimming off so that they're flush against the edge. But this wasn't a problem. I have the Spellbinders non-stick little detail scissors, and they're great for cutting through foam tape. So then once that's done, I am going to adhere my sentiment down in this top left-hand corner where I kind of have this little bit of blank space, but I didn't love that it was the only white thing on my card. So I decided that I was going to try to incorporate some more white. Here I'm adding little pink rhinestones just to accent the sentiment. It's hard to see on the card, but in the photos you can see it. And there's always photos over on Instagram as well as at the beginning and the end of the videos. I'm adding some clear Wink of Stella over top of the rose. And then on the edges, I went in and added some white highlights. I was trying to incorporate that white in there and really kind of like highlight the different petals in the rose. But this just was not quite enough to bring it together. So I decided I was going to do some white spatters to tie it together. In order to protect all of the coloring that I've just done, as well as my sentiment, I'm just going to lay the stamps right over top of these pieces so that the only part that's exposed is my background. You do want to make sure you've cleaned your stamps before you do this, by the way. You don't want to put a dirty stamp down on top of it and risk transferring any ink. And then I'm going to use some Copic opaque white ink, and I'm going to spatter that into the background to tie that white in. And then I liked that much better. Then I can just remove the stamps, clean those off. They just wipe up with just like a wet towel. I have this microfiber cloth that I use, and they just wipe right off. And then that is the whole card. So I hope that this inspires you to try some oldie but goodie techniques, or maybe blend some color families. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.